Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Wealth and Women. Today your hosts are Tracy Brooks and myself, Hazel Bowen, and we're joined by a special guest, Emma Gill from Mills & Reeve. Emma has been a lawyer for 10 years and she is a principal associate at Mills & Reeve, specialising in wealth for private clients, typically clients with family businesses looking to pass on wealth, and also working with clients in special sectors such as sports and media. In addition, Emma is one of the LinkedIn legal influencers, which I'm sure will come up a little bit more today. So thank you ever so much for joining us, Emma. To get started, it would be great to hear a bit about your journey into working in wealth in the legal side.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me. So I think for me, I didn't necessarily see it as a journey into working in wealth. It was a journey into the legal sector, and then I've just ended up in a wealth-specific part of that. So for me, I didn't have big aspirations of being a lawyer when I was a small child or anything like that. But I did a law A-level, and I found it really interesting. And I was studying kind of contract law and criminal law and things like that, but I found that interesting. So completely removed from what I do today. But I thought that was something I would like to learn more about. So I then applied to university to do a law degree, and then it just sort of happened from there. I then did the legal practice course. I applied for training contracts and kind of ended up where I am today. And that makes it sound like it was just a very smooth sailing journey, which isn't necessarily the case. But once I found my way into the legal sector, during my training contract, I worked in a few different areas of the business, and then really enjoyed working in the private client team and working with families looking to transition wealth and do their estate planning and things like that. So just kind of found myself there, and I really loved it.
Thank you. Just because most of our listeners are going to be in financial services, financial planning type roles, can you just give us an overview, I'm going to say, of a typical day, although I know for you a typical day will be very varied, but please, if you can.
Sure. I think for the kind of traditional way in which you think private client lawyers work tends to be the kind of wills and probate sort of work type. So meeting with clients to talk about their wills, any other estate planning that they might want to do, or then helping bereaved families through the probate process after one of their loved ones has passed away. So that's the kind of conventional private client practice, which I do a bit of. I do quite a lot of wills for clients, particularly a lot of the sports clients in the media sector. And I think from there, a lot of what I've tended to do more recently is that broader estate planning and lifetime planning piece, which obviously leans in quite well to a lot of the things that you do on the financial planning side. And I think there's a real kind of synergy there between the roles and working with families to kind of help them through collaboratively and holistically. So a lot of that is talking about making lifetime gifts, thinking about their pension arrangements, obviously not to the same degree that you do, but thinking about how they fund their kind of how they want to live their lives, what they want to do with their wealth, how they want to pass it on to the next generation, the legacy they might want to leave from there. So that's kind of a lot of it. So for me, a lot of business owning clients. So there's the kind of personal wealth piece, but also the company wealth. And one of the things that we do a lot at Mills & Reeve is really making sure that those aspects all tie together. So I spend quite a lot of time looking at articles of association and shareholders agreements rather than just that kind of stereotypical wills and probate angle, just to really make sure everything, dovetails nicely together, and we can set things up in the right way for our clients. So there's a lot of meeting with clients, looking at their kind of corporate documents or looking at other documents they've got in place, existing wills, trust documents, looking at pension arrangements, that sort of thing. So that's my kind of day to day.
It does sound quite similar to financial planning, and there's a bit like a slight overlap between financial planning and then also what you do. Do you when you're constructing a financial plan, do you have a financial advisor alongside you as well? So you get it to one point and then the financial planner takes it to another point, or do you tend to do it in isolation? Which way does it tend to work best?
I think the way that it works best is, particularly with some of the larger, wealthier families, having all of the advisors working in tandem together. So having a, family meeting with the advisors once, twice a year to get everyone around the table and, talk through all of the issues so that, you've got the legal advice there, you've got the financial planning, probably some tax advice from an accountant or something like that. Everyone's sitting around the table and working through it all together. Particularly on the investment piece as well, reviewing a lot of that at the same time. So with some of the families that I act for, we do quite a lot of that. So I've got one client where we set up a family investment company a few years ago. And we make sure that we have those annual review meetings and work out, what the family's been up to over the years, what we need to do looking forward. Are the wills and things like that up to date? Do we need to make any tweaks to existing documents? Thinking about the tax returns for the trust, what the investments are held within the FIC, that sort of thing. So I feel like, as I said, that collaborative approach is really the best way to do things for our clients.
It certainly shows that you are an expert in your field and have had quite a varied career, I would say, although with Mills & Reeve, being able to use knowledge and experience knowledge and learn from other areas of the business. Just to take a step back, you spoke very briefly about your journey so far from university. Mm-hmm. It would be great to explore your background prior to that, if that's okay. So just for context, both Tracy and I come from modest backgrounds, and in the financial services sector, that can be slightly different to the norm. So it'd be great to hear where you came from, if you're happy to share, and what inspired you to, and what pushed you, if anything, if other than yourself, to get you to where you are.
Yeah, sure. Very similar for me, to be honest, and similarly in the legal sector, there is a kind of a larger than expected cohort of more wealthy families who move into the legal industry, whereas that was definitely not where I came from. So I grew up on the outskirts of the New Forest. My dad worked in agriculture, and my mum worked in the local college in the finance team there. And I was the first in my family to go to university, which was fantastic, and everyone was very, very supportive. And I'd always been kind of a high achiever and had big goals as to what I wanted to achieve in life. And I didn't really know what those were going to be until I kind of found the legal sector. But there definitely was a kind of a steep curve out of that, and I particularly found that trying to get into law, we knew no one who worked in the legal sphere. I had friends at uni who were doing work experience with, daddy's friend in the city, and that sort of thing. And that was a real challenge to kind of overcome that and, do what I could to get some experience, which literally included walking up and down the main road in Southampton where all the law firms are, and putting my physical CV into all of the little high street firms to get some work experience. And that worked out well for me. I managed to get a few bits and bobs, and then that gave me enough to get vacation schemes and things like that, and then get the training contracts. It was definitely a challenging period. So generally in the legal sector, at least when I did it, it's changing a bit now, but people would start applying for training contracts during your second year of university, because it's kind of a 2-year lead in. So you finish your third year, do the legal practice course, and then start your training contract. And so I must have applied for 40, 50 VAC schemes and training contracts that year, and got a few vacation schemes, got a few interviews, but at the end of the summer, when everyone was kind of coming back into university talking about the offers for training contracts they received, I was sat there drawing a blank. And so that was definitely a challenging time of, overcoming that constant rejection of feeling like your emails inbox every day was just, no, actually, sorry, we don't want you. And even where, you get quite far through a process of an application, and then, yep, tough luck, we've chosen someone else. So I repeated that process the next year, in my third year, and that was actually the first year I applied to Mills & Reeve. I was at university in Birmingham, and they have an office there, and when we kind of crossed paths doing a free legal advice group that they did with the university. So I'd kind of been into the office in Birmingham and was like, right, this firm sounds really great, like I'll give them a go. Not really thinking anything would come of it. It would just be another one of my list of 40 or 50 applications I made that year. But I got invited for assessment centre, got the vacation scheme, and then got offered the training contract. And it was, after a long, long slog, it was amazing to actually get over that line. And it's really interesting then looking back at that now, is that was the dream, that was the end goal, is to get the training contract and then do the training contract and qualify. And in September I've been qualified for 9 years, but you kind of forget that all that stuff happens later. You're like, the goal is to qualify. And so yeah, looking back on that time now, it's really wild to see how I was so fixated on that goal and doing everything I possibly could to get there, which was quite a challenge.
Fantastic. And I'm assuming, as with our profession, there's a lot of exams involved, and I assume that you've set up a lot of exams and continue to do more exams.
I'm on a break at the moment. I'm hoping not to do anything too soon. So the kind of university exams, and then a year of the legal practice course with some exams on it as well. And I thought at that point that my exam days were over. Little did I know, qualifying into the private client world is that everyone wants you to do STEP exams. So I started those. I think I must have been 1 year qualified when I started them, and over the course of 2 years did another 4 exams, which, Hazel, you're doing some of them at the moment. They are quite challenging exams.
They are.
I'd say that, I would say, because I've got the same qualifications, I would say they are one of the hardest exams I've ever sat. It's mentally draining exams, but well worth it.
Definitely, and it was such a good time for me to do them. And I just qualified, and wanting to really upskill my technical knowledge. So a lot of people kind of either decide to do them straight away or wait until they've got the experience under their belt. And I think for me it was the right way to do it, because I was just desperate for all of that technical knowledge, and it's that you don't know what you don't know sort of thing. So I think for me it was really good, and luckily did it at a point in my career where things were a little bit more, I was more junior. I didn't have as many of the kind of pressures of things that kind of come as you get more qualified. But it was a really, really worthwhile. But like you say, they're such draining exams. And I found myself for that 2 years on a kind of a cycle of, giving all of myself to the STEP exams, all of my, evenings and weekends, and then kind of coming out the other side and being like, okay, now what?
What do I do in my free time?
What do I do now? And then kind of reestablishing what life looks like without that. So I was quite glad to finish those. I think I finished them in 2019. And my initial thought was, okay, what do I do now? But actually, I think I'm happy where I am. We'll see. Never say never. And there's some of the newer qualifications they brought in with the kind of family business advising, where there's coursework and things like that. So maybe we'll do something like that in the future, but I don't see myself sitting any more exams anytime soon.
Yeah, well, for the family business one, I've got that one, and
I'm doing that at the moment.
Yeah, and a couple of people have asked me in the industry who don't have STEP. They're like, well, why are you doing it? What's the point of doing it? But I've just mentioned to Hazel this morning, it makes you more relatable and more relevant to that client, where they feel like, yeah, you understand me, you know what I'm going through. So I think you're going to get better connections, better relationship with those clients. I think they're pretty important to have. Yeah,
definitely. And I think the CPD aspect of it is really great as well. So I spent my morning at the STEP seminar in Cambridge, doing cross-border estate planning stuff, and it's stuff that I do a little bit of, but actually, it's not a normal part of my practice. But actually having those sorts of opportunities for learning from experts in their field. So
and it gives you that awareness as well of what else is out there. And you might think, oh, that's actually an avenue I'm quite interested in, and you might want to delve into it. So if you don't know about it, then
exactly, you don't know what you don't know.
You don't.
It helps you have more broad conversations with clients as well, isn't it? Even if you don't advise in that particular area, to have an understanding of the things that they're coming to you talking about, and be able to speak with their advisors on a knowledgeable level, I think it's really important. Moving off of exams, which would fall under successes, would you be happy to share any more successes or any challenges that you found along the way? We're here obviously as women today on the Wealth and Women podcast, so if there's anything in your profession that you think is a challenge for women particularly, or if not, which would obviously be wonderful, general challenges that you've had that you've been able to learn from, and sort of advice you might give.
Yeah, so I think for me the kind of challenge career-wise was more accessing the profession and getting in at the outset, and that was perhaps more a social mobility piece than a female specific piece. The legal industry is quite heavily women based at the junior levels. I think the most recent stats are that non-partner solicitors, there's 62% are female. Once you get into that kind of the equity partnership, it's like 32% versus. So, as you progress, the female figures dwindle a little bit. But, things are changing, things are moving on. Hopefully in the next, 20 years, that will kind of even out even more. But I think there's that challenge kind of as you progress through the legal industry. I think that's probably the main.
Why is that, do you think?
So I think it's probably historic in some degree, in that the people who are at the kind of the top of the equity at the moment, would have qualified into the profession quite a while ago. So, the profession has changed quite a lot in that time. It's changed a lot in the 10 years I've been working as a lawyer. And I think obviously it's the classic challenge of childcare and going off and having children, making decisions about your career, and maybe a lot of people might choose that they don't want that kind of top ranking of being a partner or whatever, and are quite happy to do a great job for their clients, do fantastic things in their career, but don't need the kind of partner title, and actually it works better for them to be able to have a little bit less pressure, but have the flexibility to bring up kids and stuff like that, which I think there's still a lot of people do want that extra level, and I count myself within that bracket, so that's my kind of aspiration. But I think as time goes on, hopefully that'll change a bit more, and we'll see how that goes.
And you said social mobility was a potential challenge accessing the profession. Have you seen that have any impact on you within the context of your profession, not specifically related to your employer, but working with different types of clients, particularly wealthy clients? Does it impact because you're not mixing in those social circles, or are there any views that you come across that don't chime with your own?
There probably are some clients who have different views on a lot of that stuff than I might, and so you kind of keep certain things to yourself, obviously. There have been some challenges in that respect, particularly where clients are, as you say, wealthier and make decisions about their wealth and how they school their children and all of that sort of thing. I remember being asked by a client where I went to school, and I was like, well, he must be in university, because why would anyone have ever heard of my little school in just outside Southampton? And so I was like, I went to university in Birmingham. He said, no, school. And I was like, what? And it was just, he couldn't comprehend that I could have achieved what I had achieved in my career without having been privately educated. So I think there are views like that some of these clients do have, but actually generally all of my clients are completely lovely and don't really think about that aspect of it. As long as I can do a good job, then it doesn't matter. Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's the same on the kind of male and female piece as well, that I probably do have more old male clients than young female clients. So but you kind of adjust your strategy depending on who you're advising. But I think it works quite well, and most clients these days don't really care. So it's good.
As it should.
Exactly. As
it should. You touched on about when you were saying about there's more women at the junior level and less at the top. And then one of them, it could be childcare or whatever. We've touched on it on a couple of episodes where we feel that maybe there might be. I was an example whereby I had my first child, I came back to work, and I felt the system in place for me to return back to work wasn't there, and I had to start from scratch. In your profession, do you feel that there is a system there to support women who do decide to have children, come back to work, and when they do come back to work, that they are supported to keep on focusing on their goal?
I think so. I think, and it will differ from firm to firm, and I've only been at one firm, so I can only kind of really speak from that experience. But Mills and Reeve are fantastic with that sort of thing, having kind of mentors for people returning to work, fantastic support for working parents. And so it's not something that I, think will be too much of a challenge in the future for me. Obviously, it will be a challenge, but in terms of the firm will be very supportive. So yeah.
That's good.
So, in terms of thinking about accelerating action, which is the International Women's Day theme, and this is our International Women's day series. What do you think would be your top tips for either aspiring lawyers wanting to go into wealth or law generally, or businesses looking to attract, and I guess in your case in the law, not necessarily attract females, but support them further to get to partner if they want to? What are your top tips?
So I think for people kind of getting into the profession and making their way through the profession, realizing that not every workplace is for every person, and so finding your tribe, I suppose, and the people that you fit well with. Different law firms have different stakes in terms of high pressure, long hours, that sort of thing. So kind of realizing that it doesn't have to be, wherever you end up or wherever you start doesn't have to be the forever place for you, and working out what your values are, what firms align with that, and finding your way into the right sort of place for you. Because I think probably particularly women end up in a specific firm at the outset of their career. It isn't for them, but that doesn't mean the law isn't for them. That firm isn't for them. So I think that's probably a key one. I think one of the things that's really, really benefited me is kind of finding a mentor within your career area, and having someone who can kind of support you through that and champion you in the workplace, and that's been kind of fantastic for me. So I think kind of finding that sort of person can be really, really helpful. And what about a third one? I think for the third piece, it's again a more continuing one in that don't pull the ladder up behind you sort of piece. So
that's a great bit of advice.
I've had support, as I say, being mentored by various people, having the support from people further up the career ladder than me. I benefited from that, and I want to then pass that on. And as the juniors come in through, our trainees, newly qualified lawyers and things like that, of making sure that I'm passing on that benefit to them, and it hopefully will compound over time. So I think that is probably a key point in driving that action for change, and we all just do that a little bit more with each kind of transition through our careers. But yeah.
And that's such a transferable one. I'm sure, well, perhaps not in your career. In my career, I've definitely met people who have had that mindset that it was hard for me, so it should be hard for you. And it doesn't serve anybody. Giving yourself, and one, it's incredibly rewarding, isn't it, to give your time and your knowledge to other people. One, because you can see other people develop, and two, you realise how much you know and the value you can add, which we're not, as a gender, we're not that good at recognising how good we are.
We don't realise how brilliant. we never take credit for how good we are.
Well, exactly.
And we touched on before, I definitely myself, I've struggled with imposter syndrome. I'm sitting in a meeting thinking, I shouldn't be sitting here. Actually, no, I definitely deserve to be sitting here. And I think women are renowned for struggling with this. So
I've definitely struggled with imposter syndrome before, and one of the things that's really helped me is kind of reframing it as to what that imposter is trying to help me with, because that little imposter in your brain, it's doing it for a positive reason. It's trying to protect you from something. Yeah. So kind of every time I get that flag pop up of, imposter syndrome, so okay, well, what is it trying to help me with? Is it trying to stop me from making a fool of myself, or is it trying to stop me from, taking on something that I shouldn't? And thinking from forward through that, and okay, well, it's trying to do that, so actually, well, maybe I just make sure that I do this a certain way, or I take this opportunity but not that one. And so reframing it that way has been really helpful for me.
It's like an internal mentor.
Exactly.
I love that. So taking the conversation into a slightly different direction, probably some of our listeners will know that you are a LinkedIn legal influencer. Is that 2 times in a row that's happened?
3 now.
3 now.
3, yeah.
So
checking my maths.
Tell us all about that.
Okay, so I was promoted to Principal Associate. This is going back a little bit now. I was promoted to Principal Associate in 2023, and as part of that, I was asked by the private client team to run a project creating content for the team. So not that it would necessarily be me doing all of the content, but leading a team to produce it. So, blogs and articles, webinars, seminars, things like that. And we were doing a really great job in producing all of these articles, and we'd all share them on LinkedIn and things like that. But actually, you would get 3 likes from some of your colleagues in a different office, and that would be about it. And lovely people like Hazel would like them as well.
Hazel's always there.
Yeah, Hazel's there. Massive supporter on LinkedIn, I love it. And so I was like, what is the point in us all putting in all of this effort if we're not actually really, we've not got an audience for it? So I was kind of starting to adjust my strategy as to how I used LinkedIn, perhaps going a little bit more personal, talking about other things that I was doing. And then in April last year, I saw the release of the Legal Linked Influencers Q1 rankings. And one of my colleagues from our BD team was ranked in it. And I was like, ooh, if he can do this, maybe I can give it a go too. And I was like, it won't be next time round. I'll give it a go. Maybe I'll, scrape my way into the top 100 at some point. But actually, through various things that happened, I then managed to find myself at number 21 in the rankings in the Q2. And so from there, it's just been kind of a bit of a whirlwind. And I think part of the success of it for me is as leaning into that more personal aspect. So the thing that kind of really took off is I went to see Taylor Swift at the Eras Tour 3 times last year, which if you follow me on LinkedIn, you will know because I don't stop talking about it.
Love a bit of Taylor Swift.
And the first time I went coincided with Mental Health Awareness Week, which is an area I'm really passionate about, having suffered with mental health issues in the past. And so, I was like, actually, let's lean into the Swiftie vibes before the Eras Tour and also use it to talk about mental health. So I did a series of posts that week using Taylor Swift lyrics and tying it into mental health topics, talking about things like imposter syndrome or, the way that we present ourselves online being picture perfect when actually that's not necessarily what's going on underneath everything. And that just kind of exploded a little bit. And so I've kept up some of those posts and, maybe once a month or something, I'll do a Swiftie series post with some lyrics and talking about, those sorts of things, maybe work-life balance or, various kind of modern issues in the workplace, that sort of thing, particularly for working women. And yeah, that's just kind of been how it all got started, I suppose. And then obviously still sharing all of the legal content that we're producing as a team, other things that the firm is up to. So Muslim Reef have a fantastic culture and we bang on about the culture that we have to everyone every time we talk to them. But actually, what does that mean? And so a lot of what I'm trying to do on LinkedIn is demonstrate what that firm culture looks like. So, there was a post where I come back from holiday and I'd caught a cold or something on the plane and I was just absolutely wiped out. And so I was like, actually, I'm taking today as a sick leave day. Like, I could push myself through this and work myself into the ground. But actually, the thing that's best for everyone is for me to take the day and recover. And actually, I'm going to be better for my clients when I come back tomorrow, better for the business. Like, that is the key driver here. I shouldn't just be pushing myself through. And I think it's those sorts of posts when I get people from more junior people in the firm or elsewhere or, working elsewhere in the industry who are like, I just really needed to hear that. I just really needed that sort of kind of, that people are having those conversations, that it shouldn't just always be a grind. It shouldn't be, forcing yourself through everything. And actually we are full human beings and, have wider lives than just work. So I've kind of kept that up, but that's kind of the LinkedIn story.
Well, I think it's a great story. As someone who posts on LinkedIn, not to the extent you do, but fairly regularly, I know it's difficult to do at times, and particularly on where you're doing more personal content, that probably comes with some sense of vulnerability, I'm sure. So if you don't mind sharing, how have you worked through that? And obviously it's worked for you, so you worked through it, you think it's important, long may it continue, but explain that to us if that's okay.
Yeah, I think definitely there's a vulnerability to it, and sometimes you just have to kind of click post and walk away and be like, I don't really want to think about this for a minute. And you can schedule posts, that's quite good as well. And you write it when you've got the time to do it and schedule it to go up the next morning and pretend that you didn't just tell everyone about, whatever issue is you're talking about today. But I think for me, just the support that's come off the back of it has been so incredible, including internally or from people I know, the conversations that I've had with other contacts, the conversations we've had over the years, Hazel, about some of these sorts of topics. It broadens out those conversations in a wider place as well. So the number of, I'll go for coffee with someone or a lunch and they'll be like, oh, I saw your post about this. I struggle with that as well. And it just brings out that, something that sometimes is a bit of a taboo topic, whether that be, mental health or, talking about bereavement and things like that, actually just opening up those conversations. Exactly.
Yeah. Which is great, because for all those people and for you, it will mean that instead of feeling completely alone, you realise that lots of people are not experiencing the same thing, but experiencing something that means that you can, as you say, talk about it, and a problem shared is a problem halved.
Exactly. So I posted, as part of the original mental health posts ahead of the first Eras tour, I posted about my dad passing away, and so many of my colleagues commented saying they were in similar boats. It's like, I know these people, I work with them every day, and I didn't know that they'd lost a parent, and that all these colleagues were in their kind of 20s and 30s, so it all happened to them at quite early stages in their lives and careers. And it was just something you just don't know about people, because unless you do talk about those things and normalise those topics, then actually you don't get to learn these really important pieces of people's lives. And so I've definitely, bonded with people in a way that was completely different than I had been before. Yeah,
and I also think, especially when you work in a professional industry, you want to keep the professional image. And then so when you're talking about these kind of things, I'm feeling like this or this and the other, you feel like you're losing this hard structure that you've created. Exactly. So yeah, I think you're more relatable when you kind of shown this vulnerable side, and I think it's great that you've done this. So to move on from that, can you, in the 10 years that you've been a lawyer, what have been your highlights to date?
That's a good question.
Besides sitting here today,
obviously this is an amazing one. The things that spring to mind are all of the on paper successes, and I think this is probably something you'll resonate with in terms of that, like high achiever wanting those tickets. So my brain immediately goes, oh, that time I won an award, or that time, or that. So I think there's definitely some of those highlights in there. But I think actually some of the things that I've worked on have been amazing. So one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is a big trust restructuring job, and it sounds really dull to anyone who doesn't find this
doesn't sound dull to
me.
No,
tell me more.
Hopefully not to any of our listeners.
And so it's been a huge project. Lots of trusts set up years and years ago, lots of documents to review. There's going to be a court application at some point, and it's just been like the most interesting project to get involved in. So I think that's been a massive career highlight, and actually seeing some of what I could do with that. So we had a conference with council in early days when we were looking at it, and I'm being sat in this room and having this back and forth with this KC. I was like, I actually know what I'm talking about. Oh, this is amazing. And just that sort of realization of the opposite of the imposter, like I can hold my own in this room, which is fantastic. And then I had another one that sprung to mind then at the middle. I was talking about that, which has now completely escaped me. So, I know what it was. So my other highlight would be a secondment I did in 2022. So I worked at HMRC for 6 months. Which was an incredible opportunity, and they needed someone with some trust expertise to help them out with some work that they had a bit of a backlog on. So I went in for 6 months, kind of cleared through all of that, and just getting to see how what we do in the private client space, or probably a lot of things you see as well in terms of the kind of tax regimes and stuff like that, and how that all plays out on the other side, and being what they consider the kind of the good side and with the bad side.
I'm
very different mindset.
Probably see a very different.
Yeah, exactly. That was a bit of a culture shift, but no, that was a really amazing opportunity as well. So yeah.
That does sound fascinating to get an insight into what goes on the other side, as you say.
Yeah, exactly. Not many people have had the opportunity, so it's been amazing to get that.
So the next thing I'd like to ask is, we've heard so much about where you've got to and some of your great achievements, and also you've kindly shared some of the things that have been where you've been more vulnerable. You're, still in your sort of early-ish stage, I would say, medium stage of your career, but, relative to how many years you've got left. So where from here? And I know that's a huge question, but...
I think just keep on keeping on, really. So, I love the practice area that I work in. I love the firm. Just kind of keeping going. Obviously, the next hurdle is partnership, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, I think.
So is that so far, is that your goal, would you say?
That's the plan, yeah. It'll be a few years before that happens. Yeah, I'm obviously still fairly, as you say, fairly early stages. So I'll be 9 years PQE in September. So yeah, a few more years before that, but that's the plan.
And what happens, because I was trying to find a polite way to say, but you're very young, is what I was trying to say. Is that the PC way of doing it? But if partner's the aspirations and you get there in a few years, where can you go after partner? Or is it about just expanding your knowledge within the partnership role?
I think it's probably the latter, and just kind of building your practice area, expanding what you do, taking on more senior roles within the partnership, whether that be heading up a team or heading up a sector or something like that. So just kind of progressing through that. So I think it's a little bit like what I'd said with them, the kind of qualifying point of like that's the line in the sand, and you're like desperately trying to get to that, but then there's a whole other world after it. And so we'll see what that looks like, but that's the plan.
It sounds very exciting, and I'm sure you'll get there.
Just sitting here listening to you, you've clearly achieved so much in such a short space of time. What do you think is the reason as to how you've become so successful in that time frame?
What a question.
Totally beat yourself up right now. Yeah. There's no time for modesty here.
The imposter
stop that. Get that mentor back on.
A lot of hard work, a lot of drive. There have been highs and lows in that. But I think just, working quite hard to what I wanted to achieve. I've always been that way inclined from being a small child, always wanted to kind of get the high grades and achieve and cross all of those kind of, thresholds and whatever you're doing. But so, yeah, I think just a lot of that, really. I've had some fantastic support from people along the way, and family have obviously been completely supportive. In the workplace, very supportive. The team I work in are fantastic. The partner I mainly work for has been kind of my biggest champion through my career and has always kind of put me into, rooms that I wasn't ready to be in yet, or put me forward for things that I didn't think I was ready for. So, coming back to the top tips, he's been a massive help for me in that way. And so actually, having that opportunity as well has been fantastic. Yeah.
Good on you. Clearly, like mentors. We've touched on it quite a few times. Yeah. Finding a mentor, I think, is pretty important. We've touched on in the past, especially women as financial planners. There's not many of us. Finding a female mentor is pretty difficult. So we're hoping doing something like this will demonstrate like we can be one, or try and reach out to find one.
Yeah, you can't be what you can't see.
Exactly.
Emma, thank you so much. That has been really interesting to hear about. A great insight as well for our listeners into the world of working in wealth from a completely different perspective, and seeing how much we overlap. And also great to hear all about your journey, the challenges, but also the majority successes. So thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.